back about 1997, I wrote that the Ruscha 313 was not only an iconic form, but as such really represented the beginning of the golden age of design for West German pottery. Well, time has proven that I was both right and wrong. Because shortly after that, the realization came that they changed the shape. There were two Ruscha 313 shapes. And it hadn't gotten talked about. I don't know how much it had gotten noticed. But that raised the questions of why they made the change and when they made the change. I think why is pretty easy to guess, although we don't have information. The when, that got a lot trickier because, well, some false assumptions led me astray. I'll cover all of that and maybe a bit more after I say this is Teak Talking, where I will cover all sorts of different subjects with a focus on East and West German pottery, maybe a focus on enunciation. We'll see. But hey, all types of pottery, glass, and other subjects may be covered. Please check out some of the other videos. And remember to share, subscribe, click the thumbs up button, make comments, click the notification bell, and tell your friends, and come back frequently. Now, oh, by the way, I am Forrest Poston. I may have a clue what I'm talking about. I may not. Maybe I do. Ruscha 313. Well, that original shape, designed by Kurt Schorner, introduced in 1954, and just sleek, whimsical, beautiful. Looks like it's kind of leaning forward, straining as it runs with the wind blowing against it. I mean, it's just a great design. And then they changed it. And if you just kind of imagine taking the original form and pulling it upwards so that that forward lean is gone, curve of the neck is different, the opening of the mouth is bigger, the handle is not flared back as much. All of the whimsical elements, all of the sleekness are gone, the modern quality. And, well, I mean, it's really kind of strange. Then looking, it's, well, what you find most in the original form are the early glazes, like, Milano, the Ngobi decorations, particularly fish, and a few others. There's a really nice two-tone blue, very soft, texture, different from a later version of the two-tone blue. And you don't see these in large numbers, but significant numbers. And then all of a sudden, you're seeing far greater numbers of the modified shape, and in the volcanic glazes and some of the fancy glazes. And I mean, we're talking some very beautiful glazes. The form isn't as nice, but some of the glazes are just amazing. Some very subtle work that doesn't get near the recognition it should. And based on that, my guess was that they changed the shape in the early 60s, say 1962 to 64. And then producing it for that many years, 20 years or so, would explain why there were so many more of the modified form. But people started pointing out some inconsistencies in that theory, and I took a closer look at different glazes And as more people have found and shared catalogs showing when glazes were introduced, well, dang it, it doesn't fit. Based on looking at that, they didn't change the shape until probably 1974, which means the modified shape was only made for about 10 years, and yet it's extremely common. Certain glazes are harder to find, certain glazes are better, but the shape itself is extremely common. As best I can figure, during that period, say from about 1964 to 1974, they were still making the original shape, but only in very limited numbers and relatively, well, I don't know if it was a small number of glazes or if just the numbers produced in certain glazes were particularly small. Now, that also means that items in that period in some of those glazes are probably very scarce. I can't confirm that, and how much that affects value is partly a matter of opinion, and it's a matter of the glaze. There's still, some of the glazes work well with the form, some don't. But it really looks like 1954 to about 1962 or 64, they produced the shape and most glazes in enough numbers so that they don't qualify as scarce. Not necessarily common and not tremendously common. And you still have variations in things, say, I think during that period, some were made with red clay, which alters the form a little bit. I think it makes it better. So that affects scarcity, value, all of those things. And then from 1974 until, Ruscha closed, the shape was made in enormous numbers. And many of the glazes are very common. Some of them are not very good, and that should be taken into account. Some of the glazes are much harder to find and very beautiful, fascinating, complex glazes. Whether they are gaudy, the brighter glazes, or some of the very soft, complex in ways that you don't necessarily notice at first. And in between that are the ones that are harder to find, and, well, I'd like to have some of them. They are lovely. Now, the why, and I think that is fairly straightforward. You could argue that the original 313 form should never have been designed, because there are a number of angles that you could predict trouble when it comes out of the glaze. Either, pieces aren't going to come out cleanly. There's going to be a lot of areas that need handwork to smooth out, because, molded pieces do, if they're high quality, they get hand sanded and such to, smooth out mold lines and other problem areas. And that design was going to have a lot of problem areas, and some of those tight corners, like underneath where the handle attaches to the top, those would be very hard to work on. And I think the original handle was probably more fragile and prone to breakage. So you had a beautiful form that was hard to produce and perhaps prone to breakage. that's not really what you want out of pottery. You want a lovely design that, yeah, you can produce, in larger numbers. Now, as far as I can tell, now, and Schorner did freelance work. I was under the understanding that he worked for Ruscha and did a lot of their shape designs. That does not seem to be the case. That seems to be one of the numerous errors in early research, and I apologize for passing that along without confirming it. That source of information has not proven to be reliable. A lot of things to correct. But Schorner did create the 313 original form, but I think he really has more of a background in glass. And you can see the influence on a lot of the mid-century glass designs in that form. Now again, don't take that as true, just as a theory, but I don't think a more experienced ceramic designer would have ever created that design. Heinz Siri would not have done so, I'm almost certain. If you look at his designs, he was always very aware of production. His designs were designed to be produced in large numbers, which I think to a certain degree limited their aesthetics. And that's the problem, where you're trying to balance aesthetics with the commercial aspect. Schorner leaned a little, perhaps too much, toward the aesthetic side. I'm glad he did, or we would never have the examples that we do. But I really believe their first step was just to limit production, pay more attention to producing the items that they could produce in greater numbers, and move forward. And they kept it in the catalog, and maybe only produced it when they had, an order from somebody. I'm not sure of that, but, production was very limited for probably a whole decade. And then somebody decided to just change the shape, call it the same number, and all of the changes in form address the problems that would have made production an issue. Like, that area I mentioned under the top of the handle, suddenly that is a very large, sweeping curve instead of a very tight angle. The area under the neck is no longer an issue. The handle is a little sturdier. And, well, they could and they did increase production numbers massively. And I'm delighted to see some of the glazes they produced, but it really is sad to have lost the form. It's the way it goes sometimes. It is what we call commercial art pottery, and if you don't pay enough attention to the commercial side, you can't, stay in business to worry about the art side of things. So we got what we have. There's a lot to look for, and I think that's how, why, and when it happened. Thanks for watching. I'll be doing more videos, and come back. I'll talk to you then. So long.